Hey guys, thank you for stopping by the channel. I just wanted to do an impromptu video tonight, and I was just kind of curious. I was watching some old football, old gridiron football teams from the 1970s. How do you think if you come across this video? Maybe you can let me know or not, or just maybe think to yourself. But how would the athletes nowadays match up with the athletes from the 1970s? Like, just say 50 years, for example, 1973 team, you know, our 1972 Dolphins versus the Dolphins today, or the Ravens today, or and surprisingly, you'd be surprised how I think competitive, how good of a game it would be, how competitive it would be. There, I got it. But because the thing is, people would say, "Well, nowadays the game is so much better. The play calling, you got which is true. You have the run pass option." Because back then they just went head on. They went. They went. They were not afraid. They were probably, I would say, more physically tough. That are not physically tough, but mentally tougher. They were psychologically tougher because they didn't. They went in there and they were tough. They. There's no way the psyche of the athletes would have lasted back then because they were mean. They let them play too, and that's one thing I liked about the league. There may not have been as athletic as nowadays athletes, or even bigger. I mean, because if you think about it, you look fairly recent. I mean, for example, Larry Allen, in my opinion, the best offensive lineman of all time. I mean, he was up to 350. He was huge, 6'3", 6'4", 350, and he could bench press 700 pounds. Back then, they probably had, they didn't have like the weights. So, back then you played football. But nowadays, in order to play football, like for younger kids like that are playing high school now and college, they play other sports, especially high school. They're playing other sports, and they're track guys. See, back then, you had track guys, but you know, back then again, compared to today, they didn't get paid as much. So it wasn't like a business as much as it is nowadays, where it's like it's serious business. And even back then, it was, of course, it was serious. I mean, you wanted to win. I mean, there's more pride. I mean, there's more, competition and having pride and going out there and physically getting after your opponent. You know, but and another thing, you may be confused, or maybe well, you might be confused watching this. But if especially me, when I watch the game back then, it looks like their blocking schemes. The blocking was different. They couldn't use their hands as much, so they had to use like their elbows, like almost like a forearm, or just you couldn't really basically use your. I mean, so what they did looked athletic. The offensive linemen looked pretty good. Nowadays, there's so much hands. Basically, it was just when you did it, you did when they blocked, they'd block low. I mean, there was just the rules are a lot different. So, and nowadays, the medical, you have a medical team doctor, you have uh, equipment. Nowadays, back then, you couldn't even. I mean, they had to wear all pads, and that there was no field turf back then, so it looked a little more sloppier because they had a lot more. They didn't have they didn't have a lot to work with. Especially nowadays, everything's just like, I mean, down to the nitty gritty. I mean, the science of the game has changed so much, and uh, has developed better and gotten better. I mean, obviously, I think nowadays it would have been tough, but or back then, if they would have played like the best team for, like, say, the 1972 Dolphins versus the 2022 Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, the Chiefs you would say they would destroy him, but and you're right with the passing. I mean, back then they didn't. They were more built on stopping the run, but it's just an interesting thought to think about, because athletes versus back then, they didn't have the equipment, they didn't have the technology. The play calling has developed way better, has gotten way better. Uh, and again, a lot of those players in the '70s, even the '60s, they were big. They still had guys that were 6'5", 6'6". They were just around 250 or 240. They were a healthy, lean 250 or 240. But nowadays, you have like 6'7", 330 pounds. So it's just they're massive. They're just massive nowadays. So, but it's very interesting because I think you'd be surprised if you could stop down, if you could get a pass rush, if you could get like the fearsome foursome with Deacon Jones, and you matched up like Jim Marshall, and you took all those good players in the D line, and and they would find a way. You know, they would definitely find a way. It would be a really tough matchup. It'd be an interesting matchup because it's one of those things where you know the game has gotten so much better. It's developed way, way, way better. Technology, like I say, run pass option, the play calling, the schematics of the game has improved so much. And back then, you just they were in the split formation and they hand off the running back 20 straight times, and then they would throw a play action at them, and then that's when they would do it. But there was times where were able to throw a lot of good passing teams. I mean, Frank Tarkington, and there was a lot of good quarterbacks back then. I mean, I don't know if Tom Brady would be able to. I mean, I know he's retired now, but I don't think he would be able to play back then. You know, maybe he probably could, of course, the rules, but just I think overall mentally tougher. The athletes were back then, but physically better and gifted because they're just a little bigger and a little faster, and the schematics, and obviously, uh, it would have been cool to see because I think you'd be surprised. A team from that era could beat a team from this era. A team from the 1970's could beat a team from the 2020's. I mean, it'd probably be a rare commodity, but if you make them, if they would play like 16, 17 games, and you'd be surprised that a team from back then could actually compete with, especially if you know, again, they didn't play on field turf back then. They played on grass, and they didn't have a lot to work with but anyway, something that's interesting. It's not irrelevant, but I mean, it is irrelevant, but it's kind of not irrelevant at the same time. So anyway, have a good day. Thanks for watching.